The number one cause of death, which may await both you and me, is not cancer, it's a myocardial infarction. And the main reason it develops is atherosclerosis. And when a person first hears the word atherosclerosis, they usually imagine some elderly man, a handful of blood pressure pills and a future heart attack, but the truth is a bit different. The truth is that atherosclerosis doesn't start at 60 when a heart attack has already happened, but at 25 years old. It's just a long process, and by the time it leads to a heart attack, sometimes a decade has passed. And by that age, most people already have the first fatty streaks on the walls of their arteries. That is, these are the earliest traces of the disease, which go on silently for decades, causing no symptoms, no pain, nothing noticeable. It's just that the blood vessels in the immune system slowly, day by day, do their work. Gradually, you lose the ability to cope with this inflammation. Atherosclerosis, many of you think it's just, about cholesterol deposits on the vessel walls. In reality, first and foremost, it's about chronic inflammation that exists in our body every day and affects the vessel walls. At its core, it's a matter of imbalance between damage and repair. And when the blood flow encounters high pressure, hyperglycemia, that is a high blood glucose level, when there are a lot of triglycerides and you also smoke, the endothelium, which is the inner lining of the vessel, gets microdamage. Imagine cracks on the walls. Through these cracks, low-density lipoproteins seep into the vessel walls. These are the so-called bad cholesterol particles. And what happens next? These particles that seep in begin to oxidize. Your immune system reacts as if it's an infection, and macrophages come in to clean up all this debris. They trigger a process that is actually the main reason why a person eventually dies. All of this turns into so-called foam cells. And over time, these cells die and release their contents, starting a vicious cycle of inflammation. Fibrosis joins in, calcification joins in, and this is how what we often hear about today when we go for an ultrasound is actually formed. You have an atherosclerotic plaque in your neck, and it is already blocking, let's say, 30% of your carotid artery. This goes on quietly for a long time until you discover it by accident. You can run, you can work out, you can feel absolutely perfect, even complete a marathon. But all these unexpected, sudden deaths among seemingly healthy athletes are actually explained by the fact that they all had these foci of chronic inflammation in their arteries. Problems begin when plaque forms. Unstable, it becomes thinner, looser, and at a certain point it can simply rupture. Platelets are what cause thrombosis. They instantly react to this damage and a clot forms. This is exactly what happens in the coronary arteries, which supply our heart and are the most important arteries. And if this happens, for example, in the heart, it will lead to a myocardial infarction. That means part of the heart will have an acute blood shortage. The heart won't get oxygen from blood flow, causing its muscle to die. And this pain that you feel during a heart attack is explained by the fact that part of the heart simply does not receive oxygen. If this happens in the head, it will be a stroke. If it happens in the legs, it will be local ischemia in the legs. This is probably the least scary thing. What's most important for us to understand? That the rupture of the plaque doesn't happen just because it got big, but because it is inflamed. What matters, as we believe, is not plaque size, but the inflammatory activity within it. Medicine has long blamed cholesterol. There was an entire era of fat-free products, I remember those products, and everyone said that it was the fat in food that caused atherosclerosis. If you didn't eat that fat, you wouldn't get atherosclerosis. And what happened in the end? The industry got rid of fat in products, but they tasted bland. And to bring back the flavor, they replaced that fat with carbohydrates. The result, high carbs, low fat. Meanwhile, diabetes and heart attack cases only increased. Eventually, humanity, including doctors who once advised against eating cholesterol, realized the issue couldn't be solved simply by cutting fat from the diet. And today we have finally realized and accepted, including us ordinary people, that cholesterol is not the main king on the stage. It's just a small participant in this theatrical performance. The cause is deeper. It's not the cholesterol level itself that's dangerous, and I often see this in my work. There are people who have very high cholesterol levels but healthy blood vessels, and there are people whose cholesterol is normal but their blood vessels are damaged. because it's not the cholesterol level itself that's dangerous, but the combination of factors. The first is inflammation, the second is insulin resistance, which means when you become less sensitive to insulin and your body has to produce more insulin, it's oxidative stress, lack of sleep, stress, and lack of physical activity. Physical inactivity is the main scourge of our century. All of this turns cholesterol into a weapon against your blood vessels. And atherosclerosis is not a cholesterol disease, as we used to think it's a disease of the modern lifestyle. So if your doctor is just treating you with statins, telling you not to eat cholesterol and just take statins and that's it. But I would advise and recommend that you seek a second opinion, because apparently this doctor's views are a bit outdated compared to the views of modern specialists. What's interesting is that the process we're talking about starts decades before the first heart attack. And in studies where young soldiers who died from other causes like shrapnel were autopsied, half of the young soldiers had fatty streaks in their aorta. I see this too when young patients come in for kidney surgeries. We do a computed tomography scan and the aorta is always clearly visible on the scan, and you can see these deposits, all these plaques are very clearly visible. I ask if they're taking any medications, know about atherosclerosis, or have any complaints. There are no complaints at all, but the whole aorta, it's like someone made a cast of the aorta, that's how it looks. And that's why, in fact, what I said, that you might have this and not know about it. It's not to scare you, it's actually true. Often these patients, even those who died from other causes, they didn't complain about having any problems, but the inflammation was actively progressing in them. And this actually makes prevention a much more important point than just some recommendation. This is a matter of our longevity, our life expectancy, especially for men who die from this much earlier. And you know that male mortality is a big problem. We die 8 to 10 years earlier than women. And half of heart attacks among men happen because we didn't know we had problems with our blood vessels. Let's break down the mechanisms. When the blood glucose level is constantly high, the proteins in the vessel walls become glycated, meaning they stick to the sugar, and these modified proteins become more fragile. The endothelium loses its elasticity and the immune system perceives them as foreign, so it starts an inflammatory attack. This inflammation is something we cause ourselves. If at the same time a person doesn't get enough sleep, has a high level of the stress hormone cortisol, and doesn't exercise, if the blood vessels are constantly in this state, then chronic stress keeps the blood pressure constantly high, meaning the pressure on the vessel walls increases even more, and a huge amount of catecholamines is released. The endothelium constantly receives micro-injuries 24/7. Let's also add the fact that you smoke. Lipid oxidation is constant, and nitric oxide production, which dilates blood vessels, decreases. Especially if you don't exercise, your body doesn't have the necessary efforts that stimulate the endothelium to produce protective proteins. The blood vessels start to become overgrown. Indeed, the marginal and terminal branches begin to disappear. And the first vessels that suffer are, for example, the vessels of the penis. And that's why a man who comes in with erectile dysfunction often already has certain problems with his blood vessels. And already after 6 to 8 weeks of training, for example, if you start exercising because the doctor did an ultrasound and told you about your plaques, you increase the expression of endothelial nitric oxide synthase, which means the level of C-reactive protein decreases, inflammation goes down, and the blood vessels become more lively and more elastic. So on the one hand, this process seems one-sided, but in reality, you can actually influence it quite actively. And the best thing you can do is to actively start exercising. And even if your cholesterol level remains high, the risk of complications drops significantly because the inflammatory activity of the plaques decreases. We're not afraid of cholesterol, we're afraid of atherosclerosis, which we associate with high cholesterol levels, but in reality, the main pathogenic mechanism is inflammation. For a long time, we also believed that the amount of cholesterol you eat is the amount of cholesterol you'll have in your blood. That's actually not true. Most of the cholesterol isn't related to how much you consume. Diet does work too. Through biochemistry, all of this is explained, but 85% of cholesterol you don't consume, you synthesize it. You can affect your bad cholesterol levels just as you can with good cholesterol. That's why doctors often tell you to consume omega-3 fatty acids. Eat the right foods, eat walnuts, eat almonds, eat red fish, because all of this helps you fight bad cholesterol and increases the level of good cholesterol. I really like monounsaturated fats. That's avocado, that's olive oil, but an excess of trans fats, like French fries. And that oil has already been used for frying for half a day. Of course, none of that is good for you. Fruits and vegetables are good for you because they contain a lot of polyphenols and antioxidants. These are berries, pomegranate, broccoli, and spinach. All of these reduce lipid oxidation. And actually, many of you think that you need to eat right because it will make you look good. In fact, beauty should be beauty inside out, meaning from the inside to the outside. You should be beautiful inside, first of all, because you are healthy. Your kidneys, liver, pancreas, and blood vessels are beautiful. And if everything inside is beautiful because you take care of it and pay attention to it, then beauty will always show in your hair, your nails, your skin, your teeth, even in the smell of your breath. And that's why it's not about your figure or just about beauty. This is about preventing blood vessel inflammation to avoid a sudden heart attack. Cholesterol itself shouldn't be demonized or seen as an enemy. It's an absolutely neutral molecule, and each of us really needs it. Without it, we simply wouldn't be able to live, because thanks to it and from it, hormones are synthesized in our body. For example, vitamin D, and of course our favorite, testosterone. Guys, it's also made of cholesterol. All our cell membranes are made of cholesterol. But when there are too many low-density lipoproteins and this protection is very weak and there is a strong inflammatory background in the body, that's when a chain reaction begins that can eventually cause a myocardial infarction after 5, 10, 15 or 20 years. Therefore, if you think you can just go to the lab and take a total cholesterol test, unfortunately, it hasn't been informative for a long time. And that's why we always check apolipoprotein B, low-density lipoprotein, and triglycerides. In addition to that, we also definitely check C-reactive protein, which indicates inflammation. You need to check glucose, glycated hemoglobin, and the insulin resistance index. All these indicators at least give us an idea of what is actually happening and which metabolic risk group you belong to. That's why it is absolutely necessary to do this. And we think that blood vessels age because the body ages. But actually, it's because we eat improperly, because we move improperly. That's why they age. And because we constantly push our bodies toward inflammation. But if we reduce inflammation and work on it every day, then in fact, blood vessels stop aging. And in our clinics, for example, one of the ways to diagnose the condition of a man or a woman is this procedure. When we check how old your blood vessels are, there is a device that you're connected to, and we see how old your blood vessels are and what level of stress you are experiencing. And recently I had a patient who was 50 years old, but his blood vessels were like those of a 70-year-old. However, with therapy, we managed to reverse the condition of his blood vessels to that of a 35-year-old. Strong experimental evidence shows that when a patient's C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 levels drop during therapy, heart attack risk decreases even if cholesterol stays the same. So remember what I said about the doctor. If he focuses only on cholesterol levels and thinks that lowering cholesterol with statins will reduce the risk of a heart attack, that's not true. Most studies, unfortunately, show that statins lower cholesterol levels, but they don't proportionally affect the risk of developing a myocardial infarction. We shouldn't be treating papers and test results. We need to address the actual process underlying atherosclerosis. And what's the first thing we can do? That's cardio. 150 minutes of moderate activity cardio, or at least physical activity per week. You need to do this at any age. And it's better to exercise less but more regularly than to do it in bursts. Ever notice how your conscience acts up? You buy sneakers on Monday, start running, but quit after 2 weeks. It's better not to keep such a high pace that you'll have to quit, but to exercise constantly and regularly. The second thing is nutrition. Actually, let's make nutrition number one. Why? Because if you stick to proper nutrition and a healthy lifestyle, everything else builds on top of that. Many can go to the gym, but few maintain proper nutrition. So, more whole foods, less sugar, and things like margarine. Avoid fried foods, especially if it's fast food and you don't know what kind of oil it's cooked in. The third thing is sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, even if you think you can get by on 4 or 5 hours, that's not true. Otherwise, cortisol will do its job and work against you, and any diet will be pointless. Fourth, I'd include inflammation control. Here we monitor C-reactive protein, lipid profile, glucose, insulin, and vitamin D. Fifth, This likely means quitting bad habits like smoking and drinking. Not because of some kind of morality, but because blood vessels don't forgive even a little. There are studies, of course, that say alcohol can help you with your atherosclerosis. But, I find it very strange when someone doesn't exercise, doesn't follow a diet, but in the evenings drinks whiskey to lower their cholesterol. Atherosclerosis, like testosterone levels in men, reflects one's lifestyle. And if you show me healthy blood vessels, I'll assume that you exercise and eat properly. Of course, genetics play a significant role, but it's not the first, second, or even third most important factor. And especially if you have a genetic predisposition, for example, ask your parents if they have ischemic heart disease. Did your grandfather or grandmother have problems with cholesterol levels, and did it lead to a myocardial infarction? Then you need to take extra care about this, your blood vessels. Recovery is possible. The endothelium can regenerate and inflammation can subside, but it requires effort. And the sooner you start doing this, not when you have no choice left because you've already had a heart attack, the better. And if you think it's all about luck, that's not true. It's not a matter of luck, it's a matter of respecting your body. If today's discussion resonated with you, write in the comments what you'll start with. Will you start moving, or maybe you'll start eating better, maybe you'll start sleeping properly, or will you keep waiting? Until, as they say, the rooster comes home. I have a lot of useful information and similar discussions on my Telegram, so I'll leave a link to my Telegram below this video. So go ahead, subscribe and get the benefits and stay healthy.